Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today we are going to be making this superior pattern by Sears and Roebuck, otherwise known as the dress that almost killed me, but we'll get into that later. Something really cool about this pattern was that it was unused and in perfect factory folded condition. So I started out by cutting out all of the pattern pieces. I used two types of fabric for this pattern. I used this 100% silk chiffon, and I hate working with silk. So I kind of made this project really hard on myself, but I also cut out the same pieces except for the sleeves in black cotton. So the silk chiffon was an overlay, and I used this 100% silk thread. One thing about the silk chiffon was that it was so hard to work with because it's a very slinky fabric. It has literally no body to it, and also these marks that I made with the chalk would just like fade away once you moved the fabric around on the silk. So it was quite the challenge, but I chose this fabric not only because it's just a fancier fabric, but because I intended to wear this dress for Valentine's Day. I wanted to make something kind of special. I started out by sewing the darts as usual. I had the hardest time sewing the darts on silk. For the bodice, I ended up connecting the silk and the cotton later in the pattern, but for the skirt, you'll see I kept them separate, and I'll explain why later. This pattern, I did French seams, so with French seams, you're already doing like double the work, and because I chose these two different fabrics, the silk chiffon and the black cotton, it basically made me have to do everything 4 times. It was so incredibly frustrating. And this silk, because as I mentioned earlier, it was so slinky, it was so hard to work with. And here I'm just showing you how I overlaid them over one another. I ended up pinning them down on top of one another just to keep them in the same spot while I went in and started sewing the sides together. But that turned out to be a mistake. So the instructions with this pattern were very lacking. I find that really common in 1930s patterns. The instructions just literally had no detail. So there was like 2 illustrations, and the instructions pretty much didn't explain at all how to put things together. It just told you what pieces were going together when. So I kind of had to improvise and use my instincts for this one, which weren't always correct. This was just such an incredibly long process, not only because I was doing French seams, but because of the fabric I was working with, making it really difficult to handle. Also, when I was sewing, the silk wanted to like bunch up under under itself in a bunch of different creases and folds, so I had to constantly keep checking that it was feeding through the machine right, which made it really slow going, which is why there's so many pins in the fabric, as you can see, and there's so many cuts in this video. I had to really edit this one to make it short and concise because this is one of the longest projects I have done in a while. It took me about 2 weeks to complete this dress when I was able to work on it in my free time. And here I'm going in and sewing the sleeves on. The sleeves I wanted to keep see-through, and something unique about this pattern was that they weren't just sleeves. The dress had a yoke, so the yoke was the shoulders and the sleeves together in one, and that made it unique. And so I wanted to make that just silk, so it would be kind of like floating on the skin on top. And I don't regret my decision to do that, but I do hate how the sleeves attach to the dress. It makes it really hard to sew them. And here I'm doing the neckline. The sleeves also included the neckline pieces to finish off the neckline. And guys, this still is not right. It took me so long to just figure out how to work with the sleeves and sew the neckline. But I mean, you can see it here, but in my opinion, it's just still not right. Maybe that's the perfectionist in me, but to me, this is just not as successful as I hoped it would have been. I also went in and did a hand rolled hem on the silk. You can see that the top of the sleeves have these little slits in them, and it makes it a really cute little detail. But it did make it a really long process to finish off those hand rolled hems. And here I'm starting on the skirt pieces. There were a lot of different gores to this skirt. I think that's how you would refer to it. There was just a lot of pieces to it, and the cotton wasn't really hard to sew, but doing the silk on the skirt pieces, for some reason, only the silk on the skirt wanted to bunch up and just look terrible. So I had to take the seams out couple of times and redo them on pieces, which of course extended the working time on this pattern even more. It was just so hard to sit down and continuously have 100% focus on these pieces of silk because they really needed to be babied to come out right. And I tried adjusting the tension on my sewing machine and the stitch length, and while that helped a little bit, it didn't help 100%. And I also found that the silk chiffon had a tendency to get all bunched up in the machine too. So if I made this dress again, I would not make it out of silk, even though that is a suggested fabric and I wanted to use it to make the dress special. I would definitely only make this dress out of cotton or a stiffer fabric with more body. I also think that my decision to use French seams, which has been standard for me lately if you've watched any of my other videos, was part of the reason that it took me so long to sew the silk together. Here I'm connecting the bodice to the skirt, and let me tell you, it took me so long to do everything else, but this took me the longest out of anything on this dress. I first sewed it and I spent probably an hour lining it up, and when I was done with it, it wasn't lined up. So I had to rip all of the seams out and redo it a second time. So I spent probably 2 hours trying to connect the bodice to the skirt and get it lined up, and I still don't think it's lined up right, or at least not lined up to my liking. So if I had to make this again, I would not be using silk or doing any type of overlay. It was just too much, and especially because this pattern was a little bit complicated and the fact that it had almost no instructions with it kind of fed into that difficulty. Sewing the zipper wasn't too bad, but I really don't like sewing zippers in general, even though I pretty much only use zippers to finish off side seams of the openings and dresses. Here I am finishing off the hem for the silk. I did 2 separate hems, one for the black cotton and one that hung a little bit lower for the purple silk chiffon. And I also did that in a rolled hem, and that took me probably an hour and a half just to do. And this is the final result, guys. I paired this with a vintage fur cape. I am really happy with the way it came out for how difficult it was to complete. So let me know down below what you'd like to see me make next, and if you enjoyed this project. If so, what did you like about it? And I'll see you in my next video, guys. Bye.